The first time I heard the words Campfire Confessions, it was from a grey-bearded man named Dennis at a campsite along the Shenandoah River. The sun had barely dipped below the tree line, the fire was popping in the cool air, and he leaned back in his chair with that look of a man about to tell something he shouldn't. Since then, the phrase stuck with me. Over the years, I've found that the best stories, the truest ones, come out under the hush of night and the flicker of flame. Folks open up when the only witnesses are stars and smoke. That night was no different. There were 6 of us: me, Dennis, a newlywed couple from Ohio, a quiet guy named Reed, and a young woman named Tessa who carried a sketchbook everywhere. The firelight made everyone's faces half mystery, half confession. You could hear the river murmuring in the dark beyond the ring of light, and the smell of pine smoke clung to everything. Dennis started things off naturally. He told about the time he and his dad woke to their pop-up camper shaking and the sound of crunching metal. Turned out, a bear had found the root beer stash under their bed and was cracking open cans like it was tailgate season. "Didn't touch the Diet Pepsi," Dennis said, chuckling. "Guess he knew what was worth the calories." We all laughed. The kind of laugh that feels easy and warm. The kind that smooths away the edges of the day. Then Tessa spoke up, voice soft as the wind through needles. "I've got one," she said. "A confession, I guess." She told us about a night years earlier when she and her husband, back when they were still trying to save the marriage, had gone camping on a barrier island. They'd misread the tides and ended up stranded, sleeping under their kayak while mosquitoes turned them into a midnight buffet. "We didn't say a word that whole night," she said. "But somehow, under that kayak, I knew we were done." The fire crackled quietly after that, and even Dennis didn't try to make a joke. When the silence got too thick, Reed broke it with a story of his own. A Boy Scout trip gone, their secrets under the stars. It isn't just the stories that change. Sometimes, it's the tellers too. The next summer, I found myself deep in Utah, near Escalante, where the desert folds into itself like an old map. The sun there doesn't just shine. It presses down on you, heavy and relentless. I'd been wandering through the sandstone maze with my friend Caleb, a man who always seemed to think a shortcut meant potential disaster. We'd set out early to explore a slot canyon we'd read about, one that promised narrows, twists, and that deep red light that only the desert can make. By mid-afternoon, the heat shimmered off the rocks, and the air felt thick enough to chew. The canyon walls rose like cathedral spires, narrowing until our packs scraped both sides. "This is fine," Caleb kept saying, his voice echoing in the stone throat. But I'd seen that look in his eyes, half thrill, half worry. I had it too. When the light above shrinks to a sliver and the silence grows loud, you start feeling how small you really are. At one point, the slot funneled us into a chute no wider than my shoulders. I shimmied through, chest scraping rock, sand grinding in my teeth. We popped out onto a flat of cracked earth and blazing sun, a world so empty it made you dizzy. We'd planned to loop back across the open desert, but the trail we thought existed was more imagination than reality. Then, as if to prove that every great plan needs a twist, a rock gave way while Caleb was climbing down a lip. He fell 8 feet and hit hard. The sound he made was small but sharp. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. I checked him over. Just bruises, thank God. But the fall shook him. We decided to bail, to follow the drainage back toward camp. The canyons wound around like the ribs of the earth, and soon we hit 2 dry falls, the kind that make your stomach knot. We could climb down. We didn't need to. The desert had already said everything worth saying. A year or 2 later, Campfire Confessions took shape again, this time in the north woods of Wisconsin, on a chain of islands that scattered across the misty water like forgotten stepping stones. I'd gone there to meet an old friend named Marla, who used to lead wilderness trips for a summer camp. She'd invited me to join her and a small group of her campers for their last night out. The kids were between 12 and 14, wide-eyed, sunburned, and full of the kind of bravado only a week in the wild can give you. That evening, the lake was glass smooth, reflecting a sky so clear you could see the faint glow of the Milky Way. Our fire crackled at the edge of camp, sending up sparks that vanished into the dark like tiny lost souls. The smell of cedar smoke and damp earth hung heavy, and the loons were calling from somewhere far across the water. Marla sat on a log, carving a stick, her hair a mess of wind and pine needles. "All right," she said with a grin. "Who's got a confession tonight?" One of the boys, a skinny redhead named Owen, raised his hand like it was a classroom. "Okay," he said, "but you got to promise not to freak out." The others leaned closer, eyes wide. "The bear that came to our tent last night? That was my fault." You could have heard a pine needle drop. Marla froze, her knife halfway through the stick. "Explain," she said, slow and calm. Turns out, Owen had snuck a pack of gum into camp, breaking 2 rules at once: no food in tents and no candy of any kind. "I just wanted something to chew while we played cards," he said. "Then I heard this huffing noise, and before I could blink, something pushed me from behind the tent wall." He mimed the shove, and the kids gasped. "It was a bear!" I screamed, everybody screamed, and it ran off. Marla groaned, half in relief, half in disbelief. "You're lucky that bear didn't want a closer look," she said. "We've had 3 encounters this week already." The other kids peppered Owen with questions, wide-eyed and thrilled, the way kids get when they pines. Somewhere in the distance, something large shifted in the brush, and I found myself smiling in the dark. The forest always keeps a few secrets of its own. It was late September the next time Campfire Confessions came alive, this time on the rocky shore of Lake Superior. The air was sharp enough to sting your lungs, and the waves rolled against the stones with the slow rhythm of something ancient and steady. I'd joined 2 friends, Rick and Jenna, for a weekend of canoeing and cold nights, the kind where you fall asleep in your clothes and wake up with frost on your tent. The fire that evening was small but fierce, its heat pushing back just enough of the chill to make the night comfortable. Rick was the first to speak. He was a tall, wiry guy with a laugh that carried over the wind, but that night his voice was quiet. "I've got one for you," he said. "Happened up north on the Shenandoah River." He stared into the flames, eyes reflecting the light. "We were running a 20-day canoe trip, 9 of us total, 7 girls, 2 leaders. Somewhere around the halfway mark, we hit a Class 4 rapid we didn't expect. Lost 1 canoe, all its gear and a tent. Ended up tracking the rest of the way, 7 miles through brush and rock with no portage trail." Jenna's eyebrows rose. "You walked 7 miles dragging canoes?" Rick nodded. "Yeah. Lost half our food, my sleeping bag got soaked in a flood the next night, so I had to share one for the rest of the trip." We were crammed into tents like sardines, everything damp, everyone exhausted. But somehow, he smiled faintly, it was still one of the best trips of my life. Maybe because we earned every single sunrise. For a long moment, nobody said a word. The lake hissed and whispered against the rocks, the firelight flickering in the hollow between our faces. Then, Jenna poked at the coals with a stick. "Funny," she said, "how the worst nights end up being the ones you miss the most." That got me thinking of a trip I'd taken years back, a weekend down a narrow river with a group of co-workers. 4 guys, 2 canoes, too much enthusiasm and not enough planning. We'd managed metallic from the water. I realised then that every trip, no matter how rough or ridiculous, seemed to leave behind the same kind of warmth, a quiet gratitude for surviving, learning, and finding something to laugh about later. When we finally turned in, the cold crept back in from the lake. I pulled my sleeping bag up to my chin and thought of Rick's words. We earned every single sunrise. Out there in the dark, I knew exactly what he meant. The final chapter of Campfire Confessions came on a mountain night that felt carved out of time itself. We were camped high in the Smokies, far from any road or cell signal, where the air smelled of spruce and the world went silent after dusk. The group that night was smaller, just me, a couple named Jordan and Elise, and an old friend named Mark. The fire was our only light, its glow painting the mossy trunks in copper and gold. Above us, the stars seemed impossibly close, like you could reach out and stir them with a stick. We'd spent the day hiking through mist and sunlight, the trail winding up through ridges and fern hollows until our legs ached and our shoulders were grooved from the straps of our packs. Dinner was simple: beans, bread, a few strips of jerky. But out there, it tasted like a feast. We were quiet at first, content just to listen to the fire crackle and the distant call of an owl. Then Mark, who'd been lost in thought all evening, finally spoke. "Funny thing about secrets," he said, tossing another branch onto the fire. "They don't stay buried out here. The woods have a way of drawing them out." He told us about a trip years earlier to Big Bend, where every outing seemed cursed by chaos. Canopies blown away, flats in the desert, tents crushed by wind and hail. One night, they'd faced a dust storm so fierce it filled everything they owned with half an inch of sand. His wife had been sick that night, sitting on a bucket in the storm, laughing and crying at the absurdity of it. "We were miserable," he said softly. "But I don't think I've ever loved her more than I did that night." That down. We laughed, the sound rolling through the trees like another kind of firelight, warm, human, alive. It was the perfect end to the night, to all the nights. When the flames finally dwindled to embers, I looked around at those faces, tired, content, half hidden by the smoke, and thought about all the stories shared over the years. Some were funny, others raw, but all of them true in the way that matters most. Maybe that's the secret of the campfire. It burns away the noise of everyday life until only the honest parts remain. Before turning in, I added one last log to the coals and whispered, "Here's to the confessions yet to come." The fire hissed softly, sparks rising into the stars like tiny souls heading home. And for a long, quiet moment, it felt like the world was listening.